So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our session. Basically, this particular session may last about close to 120 minutes. Typically, what we will do is, if you have any questions, anything, please do put it in the chat box rather than by default, we'll keep you guys, everybody in the mute, okay? Because the session otherwise get disturbed. Hope you people will understand the flow of the discussion and everything. So the training coverage is basically into the PCI DSS understanding of payment industry and PCI DSS applicability to the organizations. So what kind of organizations require PCI DSS and benefits of getting PCI DSS certification and a high-level overview of PCI DSS requirements and certification steps and what you can expect and what is the QRC unique approach to minimize the hassle-free certification. And lastly, we will have a question and answer session where any kind of questions are there. So my QSA will be able to give you the response for those questions. See, the training rules are pretty simple. Everybody is kept on mute by default, and we request you to just keep your microphone and video on a mute mode so that the bandwidth will not be an issue. And for any kind of questions, you can use the chat option. At the same time, if suppose you have any point to be discussed, you can just put it in the chat box so that we will give you an appropriate time. You can have a discussion also. And the majority of people are from different parts of the country, world, joining the session. So the pace of the discussion will be a little slower so that everybody able to understand the discussion in a clear manner. Hope everybody is with me on this. And thank you so much once again for attending this session. Okay, now let us go to the overview of payment card industry. What exactly the payment card industry? The PCI Security Standard Council is a global firm which is actually established by the 5 major credit card brands, major card brands, let us say. Those are Master, Visa, Amex, JCB, and Discovery. So the main purpose is to protect the cardholders' information. So to protect the security of the cardholders' data, this particular council has been established. So the PCI family security standards intend to secure processing infrastructure of the payment industry, at the same time technical and operational requirements and protecting cardholders' data. That is what the main aim of this PCI council. So PCI Council actually, which is majorly covering 3 communities. Those are merchants, processors, and service providers. Another one is the software developers. The third one is the device manufacturers. The ecosystem of payment devices who are manufacturing and who are building applications, who are into card processing infrastructure, whoever is dealing with the card data environment, all those people comes under the payment card industry certification purview. Okay, so we will go in more in detail in our coming up slides. So payment card industry security standards are basically there are different types of certifications are available. First thing is that for the manufacturers, that is a PCI PIN transaction security PTS. For software vendors who build softwares for the payment card industry, for them PCI SSF certification. And for merchants and processors, the PCI DSS data security standard is there. For remaining things, of course, the ecosystem, there are different types of PCI security standard compliance are available, like PCI 3DS and other stuff. Okay. Now, what are the roles and responsibility of PCI Council here? The major credit card brands typically why they have designed this particular standard is to make sure in the ecosystem, whoever is using these card brands, They will be like an acquiring banks, the credit card printing and processing companies, then the merchants, assessing companies, service providers. All these people comes under the PCI Council purview. Now, who is responsible for each card brand? Like PCI security standard, maintain the PCI standards. They'll give us the trainings, periodical trainings they'll give, and they have major forums for all the stakeholders to give the necessary informations. And acquiring banks and credit card brands, they have connected with the assessors, like qualified security assessing companies like QRC. Under QRC, there will be QSAs will be there, qualified security assessors. The organization will have QSA certification. Same thing with the auditors also, or qualified security assessors also. The similar thing, who all people are involved in this particular PCI Council certifications are like merchants and service providers. Depending on the number of transactions, the merchant levels will be decided, like an L1 to L4, and the service providers also L1 to L3 category. Typically, there are two types of card transactions are there. One is card present transactions, and the second one is card not present transactions. Typically, everybody understands like we are using credit cards and debit cards for the transactions with the merchants at various locations, like in hotel industry, clothing, retailers, household goods, entertainment, online shopping, food, and travel. So all these places we use a card present and card not present. Both the transactions can happen. Now, what exactly card not present means? Where the transaction happens without the physical presence of the card. It's like online shopping carts, buy buttons websites, next recurring subscription billings, where electronic invoicing. So these are some of the places where card not present happens. The second category is where the card present transactions, where the card is present during the transaction, the physical presence of the card will be there. So in card present transactions more, like a traditional countertop credit card machines are there, POS devices will be there, contactless enabled terminals will be there. Of course, card readers connected to smartphones and tablets. In the current situation, every small vendor is also using these kind of devices. Now, channel of card transactions are like everybody understands, like ATM kiosks, POS devices, cash deposit machines are there, through over the phone, online, standing instructions, and imprint machines. Of course, the imprint machines are currently almost outdated. The good olden days we used to use for the credit card swiping and everything, these imprint machines used to be there. Now, what is PCI DSS applicability? It is I request my QSC to give some overview about what exactly store, process, transmit the cardholder's data. Hare, over to you.
Yeah, Sir, thank you. See, in order to identify the applicability of PCI DSS, we need to understand the three terminologies which are mentioned here. Okay, first is store, second process, third is transmit. Okay, so whoever or the basic category or basic assumption or the basic idea behind applicability, if an entity is involved into either of three, that is store, process of transmission of cardholder data, then PCI DSS is applicable to them. Okay, so let's understand one by one for each and every term which is mentioned here. So can you please go back to that same slide? Okay, first is store. Okay, storage of cardholder data as in, say for example, I have a website, okay, grocery website, okay, it's abc.com. Okay, so the users or the end customers will browse to the abc.com over their browser. Okay, they will select groceries. Okay, they will add the groceries to the cart. Okay, and then they will move ahead to make the payment. Now to make the payment, they will be entering their credit card details. Okay, so as a merchant, I am storing your cardholder data. So whatever 16-digit card number or probably name, expiry, CVV, what all details you will be entering on my website, that is abc.com, to make the payment for that respective grocery which you are buying, that is called as storage. Okay. So all the entities, okay, whether it is merchant or service provider or any such entity which is involved into storage of the cardholder number, that is 16-digit cardholder number, any entity that is involved in storage of cardholder data, that entity is supposed to implement PCI DSS. Okay. Now, second, let's understand about transmission. Okay. Now, same scenario, my grocery website, abc.com. Okay. And customer will browse to the abc.com over their browser. They will select the groceries, add into the cart. Okay. And now they are supposed to make the payment to buy those groceries. So what they will do, they will click on buy now. Okay. So once they click on buy now, they are supposed to enter the cardholder details like name, PAN, expiry, CVU on my website, that is abc.com. Now, whatever data I have captured, okay, whatever the data I have captured from the end customer, I need to send it to the bank for authorization of the transactions, because ultimately banks are supposed to authorize the transactions. So whatever data I am capturing, that is card number, 16-digit card number, name, expiry, or CVV. The captured data I'll be sending to the third party, which will be sending this data to the bank, because in most of the cases, these merchants, they do not have any direct connections with the bank. So there is a middle processor, or there is a entity which is standing between the merchant and the banks. Those entities are basically called as payment gateways or payment aggregators. Maybe we have heard about them. Okay. So what these payment gateways and payment aggregators do, they take the data from the merchant and then they transmit the data to the banks. So what they're doing, they're transmitting the data from one end to the another end. Okay. So they are, say for example, XYZ is the name of that payment aggregator or the payment gateway. Okay. So whatever cardholder data is getting captured by the website of Hare Krishna, that is xyzabc.com, will be sent to the payment gateway, that is XYZ. XYZ will take that data and send it to the banks for authorization. Okay. So in this case, what XYZ is doing, they are basically transmitting the data which they have received from one merchant and sending it to the banks for authorization. Okay. So transmission of cardholder from one place to another place. Okay. So any entity which is involved in the transmission of data, this is just an example of transmission. So any entity which is involved into the transmission of cardholder data, such entities are supposed to have PCI DSS implemented in their organization. Okay. Now, we have discussed about storage and processes, storage and transmission. Okay. Now the last is process. Okay. So whoever entity who is involved into processing of cardholder data, they are supposed to implement PCI DSS. Now, example of processing is, say for example, consider a bank. Okay. Let's say HDFC Bank. Okay. I need to have a credit card or debit card for an HDFC Bank. Okay. So what I will do, I will go to a branch. Okay. From the branch person, I'll request, hi, Mr. XYZ, I want the credit card or debit card. Okay. So that branch representative, they will raise the request internally to for a credit card. Okay. Now HDFC, they will send this customer details to a third party to print and generate a card. Okay. Say for example, HDFC will capture my details like customer name is Hare Krishna, address is Mumbai, date of birth XYZ. All those details HDFC Bank will capture. Now they will send this data to a third party, and what this third party will do, they will generate a card, okay, on behalf of HDFC, and they will print that card. Okay. So what they are doing, they are basically processing the cardholder data, that is generation of cardholder data and printing of that cardholder into a physical format. What they're doing, generating the card and printing the debit card or credit card. So this is basically one of an example for processing. Okay, HDFC is sending customer data who has raised the request for a credit card. They're sending this data to a third party, maybe a card printing vendor. So what they will do, they will generate the card using their systems and they will print the card. Okay, so this is an example of processing of cardholder data. So any entity which is involved in storage, that is storage of 16-digit card number, okay, processing of cardholder data, or transmitting the cardholder data from one place to another, those entities are supposed to have PCI DSS in their infrastructure. Okay, now this is an example where applicability is defined on the direct manner. That is, when an organization can directly, or when an organization is directly involved into storage, processing, or transmission of cardholder data. This is one scenario. Another scenario is there are cases in which the entity does not store, process, or transmit cardholder data, but still PCI DSS is applicable to them. Okay, one very good example I'll tell you. Okay, so this is the example where an organization is not storing or processing or transmitting any cardholder data, still PCI DSS is applicable to them. Example, a data center service provider. Okay, say for example, ABC Private Limited is one of my data centers. Okay, what services I'm giving to my customers is hosting services. Okay, so the customers can come and host their physical servers or virtual servers into my data center. Okay, so I'm just giving them a rack to host their servers. I'm not doing anything else, but it's just I am giving them a physical space. I am giving them a rack where they can host their physical servers. Okay, now in this case, why PCI DSS is applicable to my data center is because my entity can indirectly impact the security of cardholder data. How? Okay. Now, say for example, you remember the merchant abc.com. abc.com is hosting their infrastructure in the data center. Okay. They're just hosting the data centers in their infra in the data center. They're not sharing any cardholder data. Okay. With this data center, they are just going into the DC. Okay. Placing their physical servers in the rack, which has been provided by DC. Now, consider a case where there is an issue in the data center. Okay, like say for example, physical disaster or XYZ, something happens to that physical center, the data center. Okay, in that scenario, the cardholder data which was stored by abc.com, that's gone. Okay, that's completely gone because abc.com was storing 16-digit card number into their databases, which was hosted in the data center. Now, since the data center systems are gone due to some issues, they are not available. Okay, or something has happened. In that case, the ABC merchant cannot access the cardholder data which they have stored. So in that manner, data center is indirectly impacting the security of CHD, which is getting stored by the merchant. Okay, like the data center provider is impacting the security of cardholder data of that ABC merchant because due to some issues that cardholder data is not available. So this is an example where an organization is supposed to implement PCI DSS even if they are not directly involved into storage, processing, or transmission of cardholder data, that is 16-digit card number or name, expiry, CV. Okay, so the applicability primary focus is on store, process, transmit. If an organization is directly involved into these three activities, straight away, answer is yes, PCI DSS is applicable. But if there are some scenarios in which the organization or the entity can impact the security of CHD indirectly also, in those cases also, PCI DSS is applicable to such customers. So Tisha, let's go to next slide. Okay. So far I have been saying cardholder data, cardholder data. I did not mention that what is exactly I mean by cardholder data. Okay. So what PCI Council have done, they have basically segregated the entire transaction data into two parts. Okay. We can see. Okay. So whatever the account data in the left hand side or whatever the data which is there on the card, consider a card. Say for example, everyone is having a debit card or credit card. So what we usually see in the front of our cards is 16-digit card number. Okay, expiry or the name or the service code which is there in the front of the card. Okay, and back of the card we see CVV, we see track data. Okay, so this is basically account data. Okay, whatever data which is there in the credit card or debit card, that data from the PCI terminologies is called as account data. Now this account data is further segregated into two parts: cardholder data and sensitive authentication data. Okay, cardholder data includes PAN, that is card number. Okay, 16-digit card number which is there in the front of card. Okay, cardholder name. Okay, service code and expiration code. Okay, now PAN, 16-digit card number, usually we see it as 16 digit, that varies from 13 to 90s. Okay, various banks, various entities, they have n number of, or the count for PAN varies from 13 to 90. Okay, cardholder name, that is the name which is printed on that particular card. Say for example, Hare Krishna Tiwari is mentioned, it's my card, then the cardholder name will be Hare Krishna Tiwari. Service code is a code, basically 3 to 4 digits code, determines what kind of card is that. Okay, petrol card or service card or ATM card. So what kind of card or what all use scenarios, use cases are there for that particular card is called as service code. These days it's not there in the many of the credit card debit cards, but there were some credit cards debit card previously. Okay, 5 years back we used to see 3 digits code that is in front of the card, that was basically service code. Okay, and last is the expiration code, again mentioned in the front of the card, that is how, till what time the card is valid. Okay, or at what time this card is going to expire. Okay, so card holder data further segregated into 4 items. First, primary account number, that is card holder number, then cardholder name, then service code and expiration code. These are the 4 elements which are there under cardholder data. Now, sensitive authentication data is another category inside account data. Now, as the name says, sensitive authentication data, this is the data which is used to authorize a transaction. Okay, or basically to authorize any sort of transactions, the user is supposed to have either of this data. That is, in order to authorize the transactions, either track data should be there, or CVV should be there, or pin or pin block needs to be there. Okay, so initial is cardholder data, that is bare minimum required and sensitive authentication data, which is used to authorize the transaction. Okay, so what is sensitive authentication data? First is the track data. Okay, track 1, track 2, track 3, that is the magnetic stripe data or EMV chip data. These days we get a chip cards. Okay, so that also comes under the track. Okay, so there is track 1, track 2, track 3 and the EMV chip data. That is first sensitive authentication data. Second, CAV2, CVC2, CVV2 or CID. These are the terminologies, that is basically what we call as CVV. Okay, now what is CAV2, CVC2? These are the same values, but as per the brands, the value is changing. Okay, MasterCard might call it as something else, Visa might call it as something else, but ultimately it's the card verification value, okay, which is printed in the back of the card. Next is PIN or PIN block. Again, these are the 4 or 6 digits PIN which we enter on our ATM transactions or POS transactions to authorize it. Okay, so quick recap: whatever data which is there in a card, credit card or debit card, is called as account data, further segregated into cardholder data and sensitive authentication data. Cardholder data includes PAN account number, that is sorry, PAN, cardholder name, service code and expiration date. Sensitive authentication data, which is used to authorize the transaction, that is basically full track data or chip data or CVV value or pin block value. Now, as per the requirement, if you can see, the right side of the section, the slide, storage permission. So storage is only allowed for the cardholder data. Okay, so as an organization, as an merchant or service provider, you can store cardholder, that is PAN name, service code, or the expiration. Okay, sensitive authentication data is basically not allowed to be stored, because if there is, consider a scenario, if an organization is storing card number, okay, name, at the same time they are storing CV or PIN, and if there is a breach in the systems of that particular organization, in that scenario, our attacker can access to the entire transaction, can access to the entire cardholder data and do the transactions whatever they feel like. Okay, like say for example, if an organization is storing Mr. or say for example, organization of Mr. Satish Sharma is storing PAN name, expiry, and CV value. Okay, and as an attacker, if I get an access to that data, okay, using that data I can do whatever online transactions I want to do. Okay, so hence what standard is saying, you can store cardholder data, but you're not supposed to store sensitive authentication data. Okay, now there are some cases in which council is allowing you to store the sensitive authentication data, but in that case there needs to be a proper valid business justification for the storage of such data. Example, there is an organization, or if you remember, we took an example of HDFC Bank. So HDFC Bank, what they're doing, they're taking this data, okay, they are sending the customer data to a third party to generate the card and print the card. Okay, now that entity which is generating and printing the card, that might entity require to store the CVV or track data, because they are the one who is printing it. Now say for example, tomorrow a customer comes and say, I have lost my card, I need to reissue my card. So HDFC will not generate a new card or new card number for that. What they will do, they will check the databases and they'll ask the printing vendor to generate the same card and give it to them. Okay, so there are some scenarios in which PCI Council is allowing an organization to store the cardholder data, considering those entities are either issuer or they are involved into issuing services. Issuer or issuing services as in the organization which is issuing me a card. Okay, like say for example, HDFC is an issuing entity, or that particular card printing vendor, since they are involved into generation and printing of my card, they are basically involved into the issuing services. Hence, storage of sensitive authentication data is allowed for only such entities, that is, who are issuer or involved into issuing services. Otherwise, no customer is supposed to or is allowed to store sensitive authentication data. They can only store cardholder data, that is PAN, 16-digit card number, or name, or expiration date, or service code.
Okay, thank you, Hare. It was a classic information about what exactly the card data means. You have given a very good explanation to all our participants. Now, who all required a PCDSS, like certifications? As Hare mentioned to you, the people who are doing the transaction, store, process, transmit the card data, all these entities need to have a PCI DSS certification. So some of them are like merchants who are into retail merchants, who like a brick and mortar model, and e-commerce, airlines, entertainment, recreation. So all these people comes under merchant category. So they need to have a PCI DSS certification. Depending on the number of transactions, their level L1 to L4 can be decided. The similar thing like service providers. The service providers, typically the banks, the customer services, card embossing, like we just had a discussion that the people who are printing cards on behalf of the banks, like a third party. So all these people comes under the third party service providers. Now, apart from this, there are payment gateways, payment aggregators, data centers, call centers, contact centers. So all BPO organizations, KPO organizations are required to have a PCI DSS certification. Now, why, who required PCI DSS and what kind of category it is? It is a pretty simple, like whoever is sell their products through websites, portals, stores, and accept credit card and debit cards, they all need to have a PCI DSS certification. How do we distinguish the categories? The one is the online merchants, like directly they sell their products through online accepting card, online through their websites. Number two, offline merchants, like some of them, they sell their products and accept cards using their POS or swiping machines and accept the payments. So these two categories in the merchants using the credit cards and debit cards. Now, the organizations which are called service providers, these entities are, they are not directly involved in any kind of these transactions, but still, because the service they're providing to do the transaction, like a store, process, transmit the card data, so they need to have the certification because they're processing these data and transmitting this data. Now, what is the benefit of PCI DSS certification? It is, first thing is, the organization security controls will improve because of the certification. So the first advantage is they have to protect the cardholder's data, right? The security of the cardholder's data. So once they have that, their brand value will improve. And they have an extra edge over the competitors. So the first and foremost point is to protect the cardholder's data information. That is a prime responsibility of the PCI DSS compliance. Now, suppose the organizations which are using credit card, debit card transactions, but they are not PCI DSS certified. So what is the impact on them? Once PCI Council knows about it, the fines are very, very hefty. It will be starting from $5,000 to goes to about $100,000 in a month. Literally, many organizations got closed because of the fines. Okay. So the sample of businesses who currently, like we certified are like we have certified BPO organizations, KPO and outsourcing organizations. SaaS companies, we have certified for the PCI DSS certifications. Payment aggregators, payment gateways, payment processing companies we have. Then fintech organizations, online, offline merchants, and of course the banks. All these entities were certified by QRC. Now, we have discussed about the store process, transmit the cardholders data and everything. Now, what kind of requirements are there in PCI DSS to understand the PCI DSS certification? So for this, of course, I request Hare to give an overview about these 12 requirements and what is the applicability and how it has to be. Hare?
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So as we can see in our screen, basically the standard is having 12 requirements. Okay. And this 12 requirements are high level, they have been segregated into 6 domains. 6 domains which we can see in the left hand side. Domain 1, which talks about build and maintain a secure network and systems. This domain talks about the controls on how to build and maintain the secure network and the systems. Okay. Domain 2 talks about protection of stored cardholder data or protection of cardholder data. Whatever an organization is storing, processing, transmitting cardholder data, how to protect that cardholder data is covered under requirement number or domain 2. Domain 3 talks about maintain a vulnerability management program. Okay. Domain 4 talks about implementation of strong access control measures or access control mechanisms. Okay. Or user access mechanism. So what all things are there, we'll discuss. Then Domain 5, regularly monitor and test network. Okay. Monitoring of logs, performing vulnerability assessment, penetration testing. So that is covered in domain number 5. Last domain, maintain an information security policy. That is information security policy throughout the organization. Okay, so these are the 6 domains, and the right hand side we can see the 12 requirements. Okay, we'll quickly go through these 12 requirements one by one. Okay, requirement first. The very first requirement talks about install and maintain a firewall configuration to protect cardholder data. Okay, the very first requirement talks about the security of the network, because network is an entry point or the key point of an organization. So the standard is first talking about install and maintain a firewall configuration to protect cardholder data. That is what all controls are supposed to be implemented in the network, or how the network is supposed to be configured or implemented is mentioned in this requirement one. Some controls of this requirement are for whatever changes which are happening in the infrastructure. All the changes must go through a proper change management record, okay, or change management process. Whatever changes are being done, those changes are supposed to be tested properly. Okay, then after implementation, there needs to be a rollback plan to make sure if something goes wrong, there is a proper rollback procedure to avoid that particular change. Okay, next control can be, okay, the system components which are storing cardholder data. Okay, like say for example your database which is storing cardholder data, this system should be stored in a private zone or private network. Okay, the systems which are storing cardholder data should be stored in a private subnet. Okay, there should not be any systems which are storing cardholder data should be in a public subnet or public zone. Okay, all the traffic which is coming from the external world or from the internet should be restricted till the systems which are in DMZ zone. Okay, so for that you are supposed to define a DMZ zone. Okay, all the internet traffic should come to the DMZ systems, and then DMZ systems should accordingly speak to the database systems. Okay, so these kind of network segregations are supposed to be done in the network. Oh, okay. Another example, implement anti-spoofing, address network address translation. Okay, you're supposed to have a network diagram in place. Okay, you're supposed to have card holder data in the place. Okay, these are some examples, or these are some controls which are mentioned in the requirement one, which talks about security or implementation of a firewall. Okay, one more example can be the review of rules in the firewall or router in every 6 months. So what standard says that every rule which has been configured or implemented in a firewall or router is supposed to be reviewed in every 6 months. One of the major requirement from, or one of the major control from requirement one. Okay, so this is requirement one. Requirement two talks about do not use vendor supplied defaults for the system passwords and other security parameters. Okay, so what this requirement basically says that whenever a system comes, or whenever we purchase some system from the vendors, these vendors provide us the system with default login credentials. Okay, like say for example, Windows Server, they come with a normal user ID and password, administrator, or a very common example, whenever you buy a router for our home or for our house, these routers come with a default login credentials like admin. Okay, so what standard says that you are supposed to remove, or you are supposed to disable all those vendor supplied default account username and password, okay, which are provided by the vendor. So the very first control of this requirement 2 states that all the default user ID and passwords are required to be removed. If not removed, then those IDs should be disabled. Okay, then what this requirement talks about, you're supposed to implement one necessary primary function per server. Okay, like say for example, database and application or database and web server should not be running on a same system. Okay, because these are two primary services, web and app database. These are primary services. So what standard is saying, make sure the primary services are not running on a single server. Okay, then make sure only required services, ports, and protocols, okay, which are required for the business perspective. Only those controls or those ports or those protocols are enabled on the system components. Okay, make sure there are no insecure services which are running on the system component. And if there are any insecure services which are running and which are required from the business point of view, then organizations, they are supposed to implement additional security feature to compensate the risk which has been identified for that insecure service. Okay, again, requirement number 2 talks about encrypt all non-console administrative access using HTTPS or SSH version 2. At the same time, this requirement is talking about organizations to maintain the asset inventory. Okay, so the asset inventory can have multiple details about the system components, like say for example, host name of the system, IP address of that system, okay, make and model of that system, location, operating system, owner. Okay, so those details can be mentioned in an asset inventory. Okay, so what standard is saying, all the system components which are there in the organization scope of assessment, those systems should be identified and maintained in a form of asset inventory. And this inventory should be latest and reviewed on periodic basis. So this is basically requirement 2. Do not use vendor supplied defaults for system passwords and other security parameters. Now requirement 3, this requirement talks about security of cardholder data while the cardholder data is at rest. Okay, so this requirement talks about security of cardholder data when the cardholder data is at rest or when the cardholder data is getting stored. Okay, so very first requirement or very first control of requirement 3 says that an organization, they should not store any cardholder data until unless they need to, or until unless there is a requirement from business, they should not store it. Or basic fundamental of this PCI DSS is, or what council says, if you do not need it, then do not store it. Okay. Okay. And if you are storing it, then define the retention period of the cardholder data which you are storing. Okay. Again, the retention period should be based on the business requirements. Like say, for example, 3 years or 5 years. Okay. So organizations, if they're storing cardholder data, they're supposed to define the retention period of stored cardholder data. Okay. And at the same time, they should implement some sort of procedure to make sure quarterly review is happening. Okay. A review is happening in every 3 months to make sure the retention period is being met. Okay. Or the card holder data which is crossing the retention period is deleted. So such kind of review is supposed to be done in every 3 months. Okay. So first define the retention period and make sure there's a quarterly process to ascertain that card holder data which is crossing the retention is deleted securely and properly. By securely and properly, I mean is the data once deleted should not be recovered. It should be deleted in such a manner that it cannot be recovered. So this is first control from requirement number 3. Now, the requirement number 3 also states that do not store sensitive authentication data. Okay, the one we discussed initially. Okay, same requirement talks about the display of cardholder data. Okay, so if there is no need, then cardholder data should be masked. Okay, maximum displayed can be first 6 or last 4. Otherwise, otherwise the cardholder number should be masked. Example, whenever we do a transaction, okay, the receipt which we get from the ATM or from the POS transactions, those receipts have max to max either first six, last four, or last four data only. So this is the requirement of PCI DSS, that organizations are supposed to display only first six and last four if it is required. Okay. And if there is a legitimate need, then only the user should be able to see entire 16-digit card number. Okay. Say, for example, you guys might have seen in some case of wallet applications. Okay. Or the applications in which we have our own card stored. So in that case, if a wallet application can show entire 16-digit, or that wallet application, if it is having a virtual card. So this usually happens in the case of virtual cards only. Okay. So if an organization or if a wallet provider wants to show the virtual card, then in that particular case, since there is a business requirement, they can show 16-digit card number. Otherwise, for every organization, they are supposed to make sure while displaying the card, it should be masked. Okay. Now another requirement of this, another control of this requirement says you are supposed to securely store the cardholder data and make sure it's in unreadable format. Okay. Now the standard have defined 4 methods. Okay. To store the cardholder data. First is one-way hashing. Okay. So hashing can be done. Okay. Second, tokenization can be done. Okay. To store the cardholder data. Third, truncation can be done. Okay. Or maybe customer, if required, or if the organization required, they can store first six and last four only. If not required, then do not store it. So they can do the truncation also. Fourth option provided by council is cryptography. Okay. So they can encrypt that data and store it in the database. Okay. So these are the 4 parameters, or these are the 4 methods using which an organization can store a data or store the cardholder data as set by PCI Council. First is hashing, one-way hashing. Okay. Second is tokenization. Okay. Third is truncation, and fourth is the encryption. So these are the methodologies which have been defined by the PCI Council to store the cardholder data securely. Then another requirement, another control of the same requirement says whenever you are storing cardholder data using encryption mechanisms, then make sure the keys which are used to encrypt and decrypt the cardholder data, those are securely generated, securely stored, securely managed. Okay. So requirement number 3 talks about the security of cardholder data which is stored, or data at rest, security of those data. This is requirement 3. Now requirement 4 talks about the data in motion. Okay, so whenever there is a transmission of cardholder data over a network, this requirement talks about security of or controls to be implemented in case of transmission of cardholder data over network. Okay, so what this requirement talks about is that whenever there is a transmission over a public channel, okay, the transmission should be done in a secure manner. Okay, so that the channel is encrypted in such a manner that unauthorized people cannot have a look inside the data or inside the channel, or basically what data is getting transmitted. Common example is what standard is saying: whenever transmission is done, make sure the data is getting transmitted over at least TLS 1.2 these days. Okay, or HTTPS TLS. So whenever we see the certificate which is there on the browser, okay, or in the URL, make sure the transmission, or that is basically the requirement from the standard, which says that the transmission of public channel should be done in a secure manner, that is TLS 1.2. Okay, now this requirement is also talking about whenever organization is sending cardholder data over a end user messaging technologies. Like whenever, if an organization is sending cardholder data over mail, for example, or messages, okay, or WhatsApp. So in those cases, the organizations are supposed to make sure that transmission is fine, but the data should be encrypted in such a manner while encryption that there is no unauthorized access to that data while transmission. Okay, so this requirement, that is requirement number 4, talks about security of cardholder data while the data it is motion. Coming to requirement number 5, okay, protection against malwares. Okay, so this requirement talks about implementation of anti-malware or antivirus softwares or programs on the desktops or the servers or the PC. Okay, so this requirement talks about implementation of antivirus softwares on PCs, on servers or desktops, so that systems can be protected from the malwares. Okay, now these anti-malwares or antivirus solutions are supposed to be configured in such a manner that they are performing periodic scans. They are getting updated on a periodic manner. Okay, and also organizations are supposed to make sure that it is configured in such a manner that it is tamper proof. Users should not be able to disable the antivirus on their own. Okay, so this requirement talks about implementation of antivirus and making sure it is configured adequately to perform periodic scans or signature updates. At the same time, it should be configured as a tamper proof, that users should not be able to disable or modify the properties or the configuration of antivirus. This is requirement number 5. Now requirement number 6, okay, it states that develop and maintain secure systems and application. So this requirement talks about security and development of an application. Okay, how to securely implement how to securely develop an application is described in this particular requirement. So very first control of this requirement talks about patching of the system components. That is, all the critical security patches should be deployed within 30 days of release. Okay, so whenever a vendor is releasing a security patches, those patches are supposed to be updated within 30 days of the release. Okay, so this is one of the control. Then an organization should have a proper software development lifecycle policy. Okay, that is, whatever development they are doing, they are supposed to do it in a secure manner that should be incorporated in this SDLC or software development lifecycle policy. They should have a separate environment for test, separate environment for production, and separate environment for development. Okay, no live data should be used for testing purposes. Okay, all the changes in the application should be through proper change management procedure. Okay, there should be a proper code review for all the code changes in the application. Okay, testing should be done, or the developers which are doing the testings, they should be provided awareness training about the application development. Okay, now the last control of this requirement 6 talks about an organization to perform penetration testing for all the web applications or implement a web application firewall to 24/7 monitor the traffic which is coming to the application. Okay, so the control is to either perform penetration testing of a web application or either implement a web application firewall to monitor the traffic which is coming to the web applications. So these are the 6 requirements which we have discussed so far. Any queries so that we can go to requirement number 7 from now? Any queries so far, team? Yeah, tokenization is mandatory in India from 1st January. We'll discuss about this at the last of our session. Okay, fine. Thank you, Epan sir. Okay, so let's go to requirement number, or basically fourth domain, which talks about access control mechanisms. That is requirement number 7. Restrict access to cardholder data by business need to know. Okay, so all the organizations, they are supposed to implement some access control mechanisms. Okay, so that access to the system components is purely based on need to know basis. Okay, or the access to systems is basis for the job requirements of that particular employee. Okay, so this requirement says access should be given if that user is required to do that activity on a system. Say for example, there is a administrator guy. Okay, then in order to perform administrative activities, that user can be given administrative role to that particular system component. Now, okay, for example, there is a person whose task is only supposed to review the logs. Okay, he's supposed to only log into the firewall and review the logs. In that cases, the access to that particular user should not be given for the administrative privileges. Okay, the access should be limited for a normal user, for that particular user who is only supposed to log in into the firewall and see the logs. Okay, otherwise, if this gentleman is given administrative access to review the logs, in that case, there might be some chances which can lead to causes into the system. Okay, if because that person is not supposed to have administrative access to review the logs, with those privileges, there might be what do we call as unauthorized access or unauthorized use or unwanted use of the privileges. Okay, or say for example, in some cases we have seen that it usually happens that CEOs or the CTOs or the somebody from management team are given access to the system components, even if they do not need to. But since they are from the management, they are having a senior position in the organization, they are given access to the system components. So this practice should be avoided. Okay, if they need access, then only the access should be given. That is, the access should be given on need to know basis, or if their job function requires that particular access. Say for example, database administrator should not be requiring access to the network. Okay, he should be requiring access with the database only. Okay, so the database administrative rights can be given, but at the same time, it should not be like he's a database admin, senior guy, he should be given access to the network also. So these things should be kept in mind, which is mentioned in requirement number 7. Now, requirement number 8 talks about identify and authenticate access to the system components. So this particular system, this particular requirement talks about authentication mechanisms. That is how to authenticate or how to properly authenticate the users before granting access to that system. Okay, this requirement says all the access to the system components should be using a unique user ID. Okay, it should be not be like there's a server and access is being done using a QRC, using a user ID called as QRC or ABC. That's not a unique user ID. What using unique user ID will be Hare Krishna underscore one, okay, or Satish underscore Q, something like that. Using a normal user ID like QRC, that's not a unique user ID. Okay, so the very first control of this requirement says that all the access should be through unique user IDs. Then this control talks about, this requirement talks about to implement account lockout. That is, after 6 invalid attempts, the account of a user should be locked for at least 30 minutes or till the time administrator enables that account. This requirement talks about session timeout. That is, maximum duration for the session to be ideal can be 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, the session should expire so that user needs to log in again. Okay. Then this requirement also talks about password policy. That is, minimum length should be 7. Password complexity needs to be enabled. Password history needs to be there. Okay. That is, users should not use last four passwords, or password expiry for 90 days should be there. So this is the requirement which talks about account lockout, session timeout, password policy. Now this requirement also talks about all the remote access or all the non-console administrative access. Please hear these words properly. All the non-console administrative access and all the remote access to the system components which are within the certification should be over multi-factor authentication. Okay. So all remote access and all non-console administrative access should be over multi-factor authentication. Okay. And the parameters used to access those systems can be something you know, okay, like your username, password, or passphrase, something you have, token or OTP sort of thing, and something you are can be a biometric. Okay. So there should be at least two factors before a user is granted access to a systems. Okay. So in form of multi-factor authentication, at least two factor needs to be there before a user is provided access to a system. Now, what can be those factors? Something you know, that is a password, passphrase. Okay. Something you have can be a token or an OTP. Something you are can be the biometrics. So either of, I mean, these three, out of these three, at least two should be there before a user is authenticated to a system. Now, this requirement also talks about that there should not be any shared user IDs or generic user IDs. In order to access a system, there should not be any shared user ID or generic user IDs. Otherwise, it becomes difficult to define the accountability for the activities which are being happening on the system. Like say, for example, there is a user ID called as QRC, and using this user ID, three people are accessing the database. Okay. Now, say for example, tomorrow, if something happens in the database, a table is deleted. Okay. If a table is deleted by mistake, then how the accountability will be established that out of these three individuals which were having access to QRC user ID, out of these three, who has done this? How will you define the accountability that Mr. A or Mr. B or Mr. C, out of these three, who has done it? So that's why the requirement is there should not be any group or shared user IDs to access the system components. Okay. Now, finally, this requirement also talks about the access to the database IDs or the application IDs. Basically, there are two types of IDs in application. First is the normal administrative ID, using which the administrator of application can log in and perform activities. And there is another ID which is used by application to connect with the database. So what requirements or what control says that access to these application IDs should be restricted to application only, or the password for these application IDs should not be with any of the administrator. Okay. So this is requirement number 8, which talks about identify and authenticate access to system components. Now, requirement number 9 talks about physical security. Purely, it talks about physical security of the cardholder data. Okay. This is asking an organization to implement physical security controls. Example, which everybody might have seen, biometric access can be implemented. Okay. Or access, physical access mechanisms can be implemented, or CCTV can be implemented. Okay. And the logs for these biometric access card readers or CCTVs are required to be stored for at least 90 days of period. Okay. Then visitors, can you explain number 8 again? Mohammed Hussain. Sorry, I didn't get you. Can you please elaborate what do you mean by number 8? Number 8 talks about the authentication procedures. Process and procedures which are used or which should be implemented, or the controls which should be implemented for a authentication process. Okay. Or what controls should be implemented before a user is granted access to that particular system. So that is basically covered under requirement number 8. Any specific questions about this requirement number 8? We'll surely discuss once we complete the session in the QA part. Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Okay, coming back to requirement number 9, CCTV or access control mechanism can be implemented. Okay, all the visitors which are coming to the organization, those visitors should be given a proper visitor ID card. Okay, so that whenever somebody is seeing, they can identify which individual is a visitor or which individual is a employee of the organization. Okay, there needs to be a proper visitor register for the users which are coming inside the organization. Okay, or there needs to be proper, or whenever somebody or whenever visitor is coming to our organization, make sure that visitor is escorted to the organization or inside the organization. Okay, then if the cardholder data is getting stored in external media, this requirement talks about the security of that external media also. Okay, what all controls are supposed to be implemented with respect to that external media, or if that data is getting stored in a hard disk or backup drives, what controls should be implemented is mentioned in requirement number 9. Okay, requirement number 9 also talks about the security or talks about the physical POS machines. Okay, that is the pin entry devices. Okay, or point on sale devices, the physical POS machines. So this requirement also talks about the security of POS machines. That is, maintain a proper inventory for these POS machines. Okay, make sure quarterly review is being done to ascertain that uh, these devices are not tampered. So what all controls should be implemented for these POS devices are mentioned in this requirement number 9. Now coming to second last domain, that is regularly monitor and test network. Requirement 10 says track and monitor all access to network resources and cardholder data. So this is again a very critical requirement. Okay, requirement says that all access to network resources and cardholder data should be tracked and monitored. Okay, so very first control of this requirement says that audit trails or audit logs of all the system components should be enabled. Okay, first control says enable the audit logs. Second control says enable the administrative level audit logs. Okay, third control says what all details needs to be there in the audit logs should be enabled. For example, the second control says that all the user creation or modification or deletion activities should be properly generated. All the logs with respect to user creation, modification, deletion should be there, or all individual or invalid login attempts should be logged. Okay, so this is the second control. Now control 3 says what all details should be there in each and every log. Okay, in case if there is a log for invalid login. Okay, so what all logs should be, what all details should be there in that particular log? First is the username. Okay, like Hare Krishna Tiwari, date and time. Okay, 1509. Okay, source IP, that is my IP address. Okay, name of that system component on which I'm trying to access, that is, say for example, firewall A. Okay, success failure indication, access is failed. So these details should be logged. Okay, so the very first control of requirement number 10 says enable the audit logs. Second, enable all administrative level logs. And third, generate the logs, or make sure the logs are having all the required details into it. Okay, now this requirement then also talks about implementing network time synchronization solutions or services. Then this requirement also talks about monitoring of daily logs. So first we have generated the logs, or these audit logs are tracked. Second is key important activities, monitoring of these logs. That is, these logs are supposed to be monitored on at least daily basis. Okay, now monitoring should be done on the daily basis, and the access to these logs should be restricted on need to know basis again. Okay, and the another control of this requirement is that logs are supposed to be retained for at least 1 year of period. Okay. Now requirement number 11 talks about quarterly scans and penetration testing activities. That is, in every quarter, organization is supposed to perform wireless scans. Every quarter, organization is supposed to perform internal VA scans for the internal facing systems. Every quarter, perform ASV scans, that is scans for external facing systems using ASV tools. Okay. Then penetration testing is supposed to be done on annual basis, that whether it is internal or external. Penetration testing is supposed to be done annually or in case of any changes in the system. Now, this requirement also talks about implementation of two solutions. First, IDS IPS to monitor the traffic which is flowing through the network. And second, FIM solution or change management solution to identify if there is any changes in the integrity of the file. Okay. So this requirement talks about scans and testing activities, at the same time talking about the penetration testing. Okay. And also talks about implementation of two solutions, which is IDS IPS and FIM. This is requirement number 11. Now last domain, maintain an information security policies. That is, maintain a policy that addresses information security for all the personnel within the organization. Okay. So this requirement talks about risk assessment, acceptable usage policies. Okay. Background verification for the employees before they join. Okay. Training awareness sessions for the new employees or for the old employees, which should be done annually. Okay. Then there needs to be acknowledgement for the security or information security policies by the employees in the organization. Then this requirement also talks about security with respect to third party management. Okay. With all the service providers with whom the cardholder data is getting shared, those service providers should be identified and monitored for their compliance. Then this requirement also talks about incident monitoring. Okay. So organization should implement a process and procedure to monitor and track the incidents which are happening through these systems. Okay. So these are the 12 requirements, or these are the high level overview of 12 requirements which are there within the standard. Yes, Satish sir. Okay. So these are 3.2.1. Okay. How to prepare for final certification.
Thank you, Hare. Okay. See, any organization, when they go for the PCI DSS certification, what all required documents, record solutions, and configuration settings for each system, how it has to be, it was given in a very detailed manner. If you look at it, the first thing is like installing configuration of firewalls, switches, routers to protect the networks. These are depending on the earlier requirements, where we have seen based on these 12 requirements, what all components need to be hardened, what all networks need to be set up, and network segmentation. All these things can be done using these things. Okay, now PCI DSS compliance required installation of all the switches, what kind of switches it has to be there, what kind of HSM is required. So those details. Now, Hare, do we go more detail on these things?
This is fine, sir. As of now, I have explained these items only. If again,
Correct.
I can go through it.
Yeah, I think, yeah, because we already have explained about this password policy and what exactly how it has to be done. So, okay, now we come to the like how an organization can be a PCI DSS compliant, where what all the steps are involved in this particular thing. The first, any organization when signs an agreement with QRC, what we do is the first thing is the scope finalization, like understanding the card data environment scope for an entire organization. may not be in the scope of the PCI DSS. So first to determine the scope with respect to the cardholders data, then based on that one, we do the scope assessment, and later part we can do the examine the compliance systems and in the scope what all testing procedures need to as per the PCI DSS requirement. Next, whatever is found, how to remediate those system components and everything. And the fourth one is going to be the reporting, like depending on kind of certifications what they need. Suppose if anybody required a SAQD, or if it's a PCI DSS level 1 certification. So based on that one, the AOC, ROC, and COC reporting will be done. Then the AOC, of course, as I mentioned to you already, then the final thing will be submission of the certifications. So these are the 6 steps normally taken place in the PCI DSS compliance. Now, what is the scope of cardholder data environment? It is, how do we determine it? The organization scope is determined where the organization is located, number of locations, and normally typically any certification is involved with the people, process, technology, right? So depending on the number of departments involved in the scope and number of applications involved in the scope, number of systems are there, and infra components, service providers. So all these things comes into the scope of the cardholder data environment. And the QRC PCI DSS certification approach is typically what we do is, how it is determined is, once we finalize the organization scope, like during the kickoff call, we will discuss the consultant, the QSA will be involved in along with the stakeholders of the client, where in the kickoff call, we'll discuss at the scope review and scope finalization. What exactly it is, once we determine the scope, we will freeze the scope for the entire project. So what happens is, when we freeze the scope, that means in case of any scope changes comes in a later part, the organization need to implement those scope changes only in the next certification only. So basically, that is the reason we freeze the scope at the initial discussion itself. Then for the organizations who wants to have a awareness training with respect to the PCI DSS, whoever the stakeholders are there. See, these all things depending on the organization to organization, if they need to have a awareness training, we all conduct these awareness trainings, because it depends. Some organizations already aware of these PCI DSS controls and everything, and the members of their organization already know about the PCI controls. So for those people, the awareness training is not required. But as per the PCI Council, it is mandatory to have an awareness training yearly at least twice. Okay. Then we do the initial assessment and readiness assessment. At this particular point of time, whatever the gaps assessment we have done, the gaps closures and everything takes place in the second phase, that is in the remediation, where the controls of the implementation will be taken care. Then the evidence collection will take place. At the final assessment, normally what we do is the current situation, of course, we are doing all the assessments offsite. Now, of course, the situation has been improved. So our QSA will visit the on-site at the client location, and the final on-site assessment will be done. Then whatever evidences has been submitted, we do the QA of the evidences. And finally, the report preparation and QA will be done. And in the last phase, we will issue the AOC, ROC, COC, depending on the level of certification. And post submission of the final deliverables, what we do is we will provide a PCI annual compliance chart to all the organizations to maintain the certification until next year recertification. So what all components need to be maintained until next year certification is, one is the internal VA, next one is the ASV scans, those are the external VA, and web application security testing, mobile application security testing in case those applications are in the scope. Then if they have a firewall in the network, then the firewall rule set review has to be conducted half yearly. That means yearly, twice they need to conduct. Any Application security testing or penetration testing need to be conducted yearly once. And apart from this, we also conduct PCI compliance review every quarter to make sure that the organization is maintaining all the records properly. So that's about the PC certification approach from our side. And we have discussed like a project kickoff call. We actually discuss about the organization, introduction of both the team members, QRC team members, and the client team members. Then client onboarding document, what we are going to share with the all the like the client, so that on the onboarding document all the details will be mentioned. Then the project plan will be shared with the client. Then a requirement list will be shared. So all these aspects takes place a post kickoff call. And the card data environment, what all task it is there, and what are the deliverables, like how we are going to do the scope document. What we do is at the time of scope finalization, we'll share a scope document to the client where the complete information of the client will be given there. And we can review the scope document. If any necessary changes required, we will suggest the client accordingly to reduce the scope. So the smaller the scope is, the certification will be faster. That most probably all organization knows about this particular aspect. Now, the awareness trainings we have already discussed. It depending on the organization to organization, we will involve all the business process owners, HR admin teams, and whoever is there in the PCI DSS scope. We conduct awareness sessions for all those people. Now, the gap assessment we have already discussed. Once we submit the document to you, what the organization is having, depending on the PCI DSS 12 controls, which are applicable, which are not applicable, we'll come to know. And based on that one, the organization, what controls they have, what they do not have, basically the gap assessment is done, and we will provide the report to the organization. Now, implementation of controls and scan systems. So this again, implementation and the deliverables like a project requirement sheet, what a PCI requirement sheet, what we are going to share it with the client. Now, the evidence collection and everything, of course, we will always show to the client how to collect the proper evidence and how to take the screenshot and everything. We will train the client to spot, and so that they will give a right evidence to us. So this will minimize the what you call timelines of the certification process. Next, after that, we will do the final assessment. The QSA will involve in the final assessment to provide, check the evidences and everything, and do the final assessment. Now, in this, the QSA typically provides all the evidences here will be done, and he provides if required any evidence to be taken once again. Then based on the QSA suggestion, the evidence will be collected once again. Now, preparation of final deliverables, as mentioned to you, like attestation of compliance, report of compliance, and certificate of compliance. These all three things will be delivered to the client with respect to the PCI DSS level 1 certification. Once the certification, like the final deliverables comes into the picture, we will share the AOC draft copy to the client. The client will go through all the documents, and they will countersign, they will sign the AOC and share it across. Then we will countersign the document and share it with the client. Now, typically here, for the sharing of all these documents and everything, QRC have a unique approach to do all these things. We have a portal. Through this, we do all the project management, everything. That I am going to explain it to you in the coming up slides. Now, that concludes the like a project closure where the deliverables, so AOC, COC, ROC has been given. Then, of course, the PMO will share project maintenance chapter with respect to the quarterly compliance review, when to be conducted, and internal VA, external VA, when they have to be conducted, and firewall rule set reviews, PCI compliance reviews, how when. So all the specific dates along with that, the charter will be shared across to the client. And apart from that, we will also take a project feedback from client, and a work completion certificate also we will collect from the clients. So all these aspects will be taken care from the portal. Now, how does the certificate looks like? This is the certificate of compliance, the model. like what we are going to share it with the clients. Normally they frame it and they'll keep it in their premises. The next one is going to be the web seal image where the online certificate. This is again, we will share it with the client and they will be displaying it in their website so that they'll organization, whoever want to check, verify the PCI DSS certification of the client, they'll come to know the who is the QSA company and what is the validity of their certification. Now coming to QRC, our organization leadership team, Mr. Vamshi is the founder and chairman of this organization. Our organization is established in the year 2016. So we are completing 5+ years and we are entering into 6th year in coming January. The significance of this particular team is we have 150 man-years of experience with respect to the PCI DSS certifications, audits, and all these required project management skills and everything. So this leadership team has possessed all the experience with respect to these audits. Now we have global partners across all over the countries, like Rukman takes care of Indonesia, Miral from Turkey, Jason from Philippines, and Sergi from Russia, Anne is from Vietnam, and Sim is from Thailand. So, okay, now to give you a small update about QRC, as I mentioned to you, we are established in the year 2016 as a single security testing organization. We were serving in only one country, that was in India. Over a period of time, we acquired PCI DSS payment card industry certifications, and we are also ISO certification body. And we are currently serving in close to 30+ countries globally, and we have 2000+ auditing and assessments experience. So over a period of time, you can see the significant growth in QRC, acquiring the certifications and having a more larger client base because of our commitment to the client. Now, whatever we have discussed, the credentials of QRC, the core competency of QRC is PCI DSS certification. Payment card industry certifications with respect to PCI DSS, PCI SLC, PCI SSS, and PCI 3DS certifications with respect to the payment card industry. And apart from that, we are a SWIFT assessment body globally. And also we conduct ISO 27001 and 27701 certifications globally. And we also conduct HIPAA compliance assessments and GDPR compliance assessments, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3 assessments globally. So especially for Indian customers, like we have a compliance services. One great thing about QRC is we are certain empaneled, and we conduct all the security audits as per the certain. And as per the RBI, we conduct all the audits, PSS, data localization audits, and all the ISA audits. Everything will be conducted as per the certain empaneled services we conduct. Now, the security services, we have a very strong security team, close to 20+ team members who conduct vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. The most important factor for any organization is to save their the information security systems and data privacy, whatever the systems are there, from the external and the internal vulnerabilities. So we conduct all VAPT for all the systems. Apart from this, web application, mobile application security testings we conduct, network server reviews, and source code reviews we conduct, POS application security testings we conduct, and network segmentation, API security testing. All the security services will be conducted by QRC. And as I mentioned to you, we have developed over a period of time certain products which are going to be helpful to the client to minimize the time in the complete life cycle of the project initiation. That is one of the things is the GRC Manager. This is a project management portal. It is a cloud-based product. Once a client signs a project with QRC, at the time of kickoff call, my PMO will give the access of this GRC Manager. Typically, all the communication happens through this GRC Manager. So the client will have a 360 degrees overview of the project. They'll come to know the status of the project. All the documentation happens through this particular portal. So the advantage is the communication is happening through this particular portal. So the access of this particular portal also we will give it to the client for a single point of contact. Of course, if the client wants to have more people to access this portal, we will give them 1 or 2 extra people also we can provide, so that all the management, complete project management can take place through this GRC manager. Now, another product is called Enterprise Compliance Framework. This is typically for organizations who are conducting PCI DSS, ISO certification. They have HIPAA compliance, they want a GDPR and security services, and they conduct over a period of like throughout the year, they might be having so many certifications they will be conducting. What will happen is their complete information security team will be completely occupied in the audits. So to minimize the audit time and have a better commercials advantage, this enterprise compliance framework will have an advantage. Like each certification will have common controls. So depending on the requirement of the client, over a period of time throughout the year, we will do the assessments depending on the quarterly, like every quarter, half yearly, depending on the compliances, what the certifications they have. Those certifications can be done without having much hassles using this enterprise compliance framework. And the enterprise security package is the same thing, where all the security services can be planned in such a way that which will be conducted quarterly, half yearly, and yearly. And the data finder discovery tool, which is primarily designed by our people, this is customized to find out the data depending on the card brand like MasterCard, Visa, Amex, and JCB and Discovery. So as per the PCI Council requirement, the card data, sensitive authentication card data cannot be stored by any organization. To remove the card data from the systems, this data finder discovery tool, we can run through the systems and find out where it is there in any other cache and memory. So it can be removed using this data finder discovery tool. So these are the tools which are developed by our own QRC. And how people can recognize whether QRC is having these certifications or anything. Once you go to the PCI Council website, you'll be able to find out that QRC is a global certification partner for PCI DSS. And apart from the Swift assessment body, ISO certification body, all those things. And apart from this, we are also having ISO certifications and everything. Now we have a significant customer like retention in past 5 years with us because of the dedicated support what we provided to all our customers. We treat our customers like a partners. We handhold them to achieve their respective certifications and auditing and assessments. The first thing is we are very transparent, trustworthy partner to all our clients. What happens is the complete process of the certification, everything, we will give a very transparent view to all our clients, so that clients will be very, very comfortable to work with QRC. And we provide them complete support right from the startup kickoff call to the end of the project. I'm sorry, guys. Now, these are some of our clients across the globe, like India, Europe, Middle East, America, and APAC and African region. We have various verticals, various domains expertise with respect to PCI DSS certifications. We have the BPO sector, we have done hospitality industry, automobile industry, payment gateways, banks, logistics, retail, every organization practically all over the world, we have done the certifications. Now, this is our global presence with respect to India, US, Philippines, and East Africa, Indonesia, Thailand, Turkey, Vietnam. We have physical offices present at this moment. So that concludes our presentation. And thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate for participating in this particular conference.